She had just one umbrella and one dream, the interview that could finally change her life. But in the middle of a downpour, Sarah made a choice. She gave her only protection to a total stranger, soaked to the bone. What she didn't know was that this small act of kindness would reveal her true character to the CEO of the very company she'd been longing to work for. A decision that would transform her future in ways she never saw coming. But what happened next will leave you speechless. If you believe small acts can change destinies, drop a comment, subscribe, and share this emotional story. The rain was coming down like the sky was grieving for every broken promise in the world. Each drop felt like a cold stab against Sarah's skin as she ran with her heart racing and her arms clutching a soggy folder. The interview at Horizon Innovations was her one shot to turn the page, and it felt like the whole sky was trying to stop her. But just as she turned the corner on 7th Avenue, something stronger than fear made her stop. There, beneath a flickering streetlight, stood a man completely drenched. His suit clung to him, his eyes blank, as if his soul had gone missing. Grey hair plastered to his forehead, hands trembling, maybe from the cold, maybe from something deeper. Sarah paused. She knew what it meant to show up soaked to an interview. But she also knew that look in his eyes, the look of someone who's lost more than just a dry day. With a soft, nervous smile, she held out her only umbrella. "You need this more than I do," she said, her voice steadier than her soaked frame. The man tried to refuse, confused, but when he looked up again she was already gone, running bareheaded through the rain, her red hair plastered to her cheeks. He stood frozen, the umbrella in his hand and something tight in his chest. Sarah didn't look back. Her focus was locked on the glass building rising in the distance like a cold promise. Every step felt like a battle, against the wind, the doubt, the voice screaming that she'd just thrown away her only shot. But deep down, another voice, quieter but stronger, whispered, "If I were him, I'd want someone to help me too." Cold water ran down her spine, but she held her chin high. People on the sidewalks avoided her, shielding themselves as if she were invisible. But Sarah had always been good at walking alone. Not because she wanted to, but because life never gave her another choice. Even so, she never let it harden her heart. She reached the building with trembling legs and a heartbeat like a war drum. The security guard raised an eyebrow, but she spoke her name with the kind of certainty that demanded to be seen. Water dripped onto the marble floor, but she didn't apologize. There was something in her eyes that said, "I belong here." Sitting in the lobby, Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trying to pull herself together. She looked wildly out of place among the polished candidates, dry suits, perfect hair, rehearsed smiles. She folded her hands in her lap, took a deep breath, and clung to her adoptive grandmother's words, "Real strength shines when everything falls apart." But was that going to be enough? Meanwhile, the man she'd helped was riding the elevator upstairs, steps firm, but something inside him shaken. The umbrella rested at his side like a charm, or maybe a reminder. That single gesture had cracked something in him. And now he needed to know who that woman was. Sarah had always known the world wasn't kind to dreamers without a powerful last name. She grew up bouncing between foster homes, collecting more goodbyes than birthday candles. Still, she held on to a stubborn belief that hard work and integrity could open doors. That's why this interview at Horizon wasn't just a job. It was everything. The company was known for embracing creative minds, but also for demanding perfection. And there she was, soaked to the bone, with nothing but soaked hope in her chest. Inside the elevator, Sarah stared at her reflection. Part shame, part defiance. Her blouse clung to her skin, wet curls falling over her face, and her shoes squished with every step. "They're going to laugh at me," she thought, biting her lip. But then came that familiar voice in her head, the one that sounded like her adoptive mom. If they can't see who you really are, then they never deserved you." The receptionist raised an eyebrow, clearly uncomfortable with Sarah's appearance, but still directed her to the waiting room. Around her, polished candidates exchanged polite smiles and sideways glances. Sarah clenched her fists, holding her composure. Let them think whatever they want. Rain doesn't wash away character. Still, inside, fear pulsed like a fever. The resume in her hand was starting to smudge. The papers were damp, but every line told a real story. Years of odd jobs, underpaid gigs, sleepless nights studying. She didn't have an MBA from Stanford, but she had something no one else in that room did. Scars that turned into wisdom, and courage that didn't fit inside a power suit. The interview room was just a few steps away, but it felt like miles. Every minute new doubts crept in. Will they think I'm careless, that I don't care enough to be here? She took deep breaths, trying to silence the chaos inside. She was tired of always having to prove her worth twice over. But maybe that's exactly what made her different. Outside, the rain kept falling like a cruel reminder of what she'd done. Was giving away her umbrella to a stranger a foolish mistake? Had she thrown away her one shot just to help someone else? The doubt choked her like a knot in her throat, but she refused to swallow regret. While she waited to be called, her eyes locked onto a framed quote on the wall, "We turn ideas into legacies." It stirred something deep inside her. Sarah never just wanted a paycheck. She wanted to make a mark, inspire, do something that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, the universe was testing if she truly was who she claimed to be. Across the building, Michael Reynolds clutched the umbrella she'd handed him, hands still shaking slightly, thinking about that woman, the stranger who gave without hesitation. Something about her cracked open a long-forgotten place inside him, a memory of his late wife, maybe, or a glimpse of the kind of leader he used to want to become. Sarah had no idea that behind those walls, fate was already bowing to her quiet act of kindness, but her journey was only beginning. The interview was just the first of many trials. The question now was she ready to face a world that rarely rewards compassion? Sarah Thompson wasn't born into luxury. She came into the world in a crowded public hospital room where the first sound she heard was another baby's cry and the absence of her own mother's arms. From that moment on, life became a series of forced new beginnings. Temporary homes, foster families that came and went like the seasons, and a teenagehood where loneliness was as familiar as her own breath. But even on the worst days, Sarah believed pain didn't have to be an anchor. It could be fuel. At 28, she carried invisible scars that didn't show up on a resume. Every suspicious glance, every "you're not good enough," every underpaid job added a new layer to the armor wrapped around a still warm heart. Her big, deep brown eyes knew how to listen without judgment. And even though her body carried the weight of years spent trying to prove her worth, there was something in her no one could ignore. A stubborn, burning light that always flickered back to life whenever someone needed help. Her days started early, with instant coffee and a head full of noisy thoughts. She worked at a tech supply store to pay the bills, studied digital marketing at night, and juggled side gigs and delivery shifts in between. Her phone screen was cracked, and the memory was full of files named things like Plan B, Plan C, Plan Z. Giving up, not an option. Sarah wasn't chasing just financial stability. She wanted to belong to a team, a mission, a place where her ideas weren't just heard, but valued. Horizon Innovations, with its promise to turn visionaries into change makers, was her chance to prove that the world needed people like her, people who'd seen reality up close and still chose to do good. On good days, she pictured herself creating campaigns that would inspire people like her to keep going. On bad days, she remembered the last foster mom who took her in with gentle words and unshakable faith. "You're not a mistake, sweetheart. You're a seed planted in the right soil." Sarah never stopped trying, especially when the storm was inside her. This interview wasn't just a career step, it was a reckoning, a promise to the little girl who once stared out the window of a shelter, dreaming of more than just survival, and now, standing inside Horizon's sleek, glass-walled lobby, Sarah knew her biggest challenge wasn't impressing the executives, it was not letting fear sabotage everything. The stairs burned, but Sarah was a pro at pretending they didn't. She'd done it her whole life, yet there, in that polished, mirror-like space, she felt like a beautiful painting hanging on the wrong wall, admirable but out of place. Just a few more minutes. I just need one shot to show them who I am. In her head, she rehearsed answers to the usual questions, gripping her damp folder like a shield. Tell us about a challenging situation. She almost laughed. Her whole life was a response to that question. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly why she was the right choice, even if no one else saw it yet. But fate had other plans. In the room next door, a man was watching the front lobby on a security feed. His eyes narrowed as he recognized her, the woman from the storm. And in that moment, everything changed. Not just for Sarah, but for the story that was about to unfold. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Sarah felt like a wrong note in a symphony of well-dressed candidates. Her wet clothes clung to her skin, like the memory of every silent battle she'd ever fought. She tried to focus on the resume in her hands, but the words felt distant, blurred, like the ink that had started to run. A drop of water slid from her hair down to her eyebrow. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, trying to hold on to a shred of dignity. You made it this far. Now's not the time to fold. Just a few floors above, Michael Reynolds stared at the screen, unreadable. The image of the soaked redhead sitting tall and composed struck a nerve he thought had long been buried. His late wife, gone nearly a decade, used to say, "Kindness is the only legacy worth leaving behind." And here was a woman who handed her umbrella to a stranger and disappeared without expecting a thing in return. Since his wife's passing, Michael had thrown himself into work with the cold precision of a man who refused to feel. His decisions were strategic, calculated, no room for emotion. But something about Sarah's gesture didn't fit into a spreadsheet. The umbrella now drying by his desk was a damp reminder that not everything could be predicted. Meanwhile, Sarah was fighting another battle, this one with her own body. The chill from the rain was catching up to her. Her feet were cold, her throat itchy, her nose burning. Still, she stayed upright. If life had taught her anything, it was how to endure. Cold, rejection, and that relentless whisper of not being enough. You can't back down now, she told herself, even though part of her just wanted to disappear. Around her, the other candidates whispered and side-eyed, some clearly amused by her disheveled state. Sarah forced herself to tune them out. She'd been mocked before, for bringing squished lunches to school as a kid, for wearing hand-me-downs as a teen, and for dreaming too big as an adult. This wasn't new. What was new was how close she was to something that actually mattered. Downstairs, Michael stepped into the conference room and quietly told his team, "I'd like to speak with Miss Sarah Thompson first." He didn't offer an explanation. A few assistants exchanged glances, but no one questioned him. He was the CEO. And in that moment, driven by something he didn't fully understand, he decided to follow his heart, a rare thing in his world. As Sarah waited to be called, she thought back to the day she first heard about Horizon. She was cleaning the window of a small stationery store when she saw a glowing billboard that read, "Where ideas take flight." She couldn't stop thinking about it for weeks. She scribbled the phrase into an old notebook and promised herself that one day she'd work there, no matter how long it took. Suddenly, the receptionist walked up. "Miss Thompson, please follow me." Sarah's heart kicked into overdrive. She swallowed hard, stood up with the careful grace of someone carrying an entire universe on her shoulders, and walked toward the door. Each step felt like crossing a bridge between fear and courage. Now or never, she whispered. What she didn't know was that on the other side of that door, she wouldn't just find an interviewer. She'd come face to face with the same man she had handed her only shield against the storm. And that reunion, unexpected as the rain itself, was about to change everything she thought she knew about herself and the world. Sarah stepped into the conference room, heart pounding in her chest. The cold overhead lights bounced off the glass walls, making everything around her feel bigger than she was. Raindrops still clung to the red strands of hair plastered to her face. And when her eyes met Michael's, she froze. He was there, the man from the storm, but now dry, composed, commanding, and smiling. "So you're Sarah Thompson," he said calmly. "The candidate who showed us today what true leadership really means." She blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, sir." Michael stood up with quiet elegance and walked toward her. "I'm Michael Reynolds, CEO of Horizon Innovations, and you lent me your umbrella this morning." For a second, time stood still. The air thickened. Sarah felt her knees weaken. "You're that man?" Michael nodded gently. "And you're far more than I ever expected." The tension in her shoulders melted. She let out a nervous laugh and shook her head. "I think this just became the most unusual interview of my life." Michael smiled. "And maybe the most unforgettable moment of my career." The room, once intimidating, now felt warm, inviting. There was no need to pretend anymore. She was standing there exactly as she was. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The interview began informally, but it was anything but shallow. Michael wanted to know where she came from, what drove her, why she chose Horizon. Sarah told him about her childhood, the foster homes, and that phrase she once saw on the company's billboard that had never left her mind. "Where ideas take flight," she repeated, her eyes misty. "I want to help others believe they can fly too." Every word she spoke sliced through layers of corporate stereotypes. She didn't use buzzwords. She didn't have an Ivy League degree. But she spoke with fire, with truth. And Michael listened the way one watches a sunset, in silence, not wanting to interrupt. For the first time in a long time, he felt genuinely inspired. And that both terrified him and moved him. At the end of the conversation, Michael stood up and extended his hand with conviction. "Horizon needs people like you, Sarah. You're hired." Her eyes widened. She couldn't hide her shock. "But what about the other candidates?" He smiled softly. "They brought resumes. You brought character." It was like the rain from earlier had watered something inside her, and now it was finally starting to bloom. As she left the room, still dizzy from disbelief, Sarah felt a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Her heartbeat danced to a whole new rhythm. But just before she reached the elevator, she noticed a man leaning against the hallway wall, watching quietly. Tall, sharp suit, intense eyes. He looked her up and down, not with judgment but curiosity. "Congratulations," he said. "I'm David, Vice President, and son of the man you just met." Sarah gave a polite smile, surprised by the intensity in his gaze. "Thank you. It's been a surprising day." David paused for a few seconds before replying. "Sometimes those are the days that change everything." Then he turned and walked down the hall, leaving behind a silent question. What exactly had just changed? That night, Sarah could barely sleep. What had started as a simple gesture in the rain had turned into an entirely new life, but somewhere deep inside, something still tugged at her, the image of David and the way his eyes seemed to see through her surface. Why did her heart race every time she thought of the way he looked at her? In the days that followed, Sarah threw herself into her new job like someone holding a dream in her hands, afraid to let it slip. Her drive didn't go unnoticed. The ideas she brought didn't come from theory, but from lived experience, from someone who understood people from the inside out. Her co-workers began to listen to her with genuine respect. Still, there was one particular gaze that always made her glance away. David Reynolds. David, Horizon's vice president, was the opposite of what she expected. Young, direct, polite without being fake. He didn't play power games, but he didn't need to. He always showed up out of nowhere, a casual greeting in the hallway, a sincere compliment in the boardroom, or a coffee quietly left on her desk. "I know you barely stop to breathe," his notes would say. Sarah would smile quietly and stash the coffee without drinking it. She refused to cross that line. She had clear rules. Work is work. And she hadn't come this far just to let emotions cloud what had cost her so much to achieve. "Don't mix things up, Sarah," she'd whisper to herself. But the problem was, David wasn't doing anything wrong. He simply existed, with a quiet kindness that disarmed every wall she had built. One afternoon, after a particularly intense meeting, David approached her in the elevator. "You handled that client beautifully. He was impressed by your approach." Sarah nodded with a quiet thank you, trying not to look him in the eye. "Just doing my job." David gave a sideways smile. "No, that was talent, and I admire that." The elevator stopped. Sarah stepped out first, saying nothing, her heart pounding like she'd just run a race. Michael watched from a distance, the glances, the unspoken words. He recognized in that quiet tension the same spark he once shared with his late wife. He saw David's admiration growing, not for some idealized fantasy, but for a real, strong, human woman. And he saw Sarah's fear too, fear of letting herself feel, fear of losing what she had just started to build. On a rainy Friday evening, David finally gathered the courage. He waited until the office had emptied out and found Sarah in the break room, packing up her documents. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" She looked up, already guessing what was coming. "David, I appreciate it, but I can't. It wouldn't be right. I've worked too hard to be taken seriously here." He nodded, respectful. "I understand, I just had to try." And he walked away without pushing. That night, Sarah cried alone in her room. Not because of David's words, but because of how he made her feel, seen, and that scared her. She was used to being noticed for her work, her discipline, not for her eyes, not for her silence, not for the small things. "I can't afford to love and lose everything," she thought. But something inside her had begun to crack. Weeks went by and David kept his distance. No more coffees, no more notes, just quiet respect. And strangely, she missed him. His absence was loud. In the hallways, in the meetings, at lunchtime. It was like he'd been a background melody, now suddenly gone. And the silence was heavy. One day, she saw him from across the room, laughing with other execs. He looked happy, but when he saw her, the smile softened. Their eyes met. For just a second, there was still admiration there, and something more, something Sarah was desperately trying to keep out of her heart. But for how long can love be silenced before it turns into a scream? The pressure had been building for weeks. Sarah was leading a high-stakes project for a demanding international client, under the constant scrutiny of the executive team. She poured herself into the work, staying late, skipping meals, barely sleeping. Everyone praised her efficiency, but inside she felt like a stretched wire ready to snap. That morning, with burning eyes and a pounding head, she made a critical mistake. She sent out an incomplete proposal without reviewing it. The consequences were immediate. The phone rang 20 minutes later. A manager walked into the room, voice tight. "We need to talk about this." Emergency meetings were called. Sarah tried to explain, tried to fix it, but the damage was done. The client threatened to walk. Tension filled the air. She stared around the room at a table full of executives and felt the floor vanish beneath her. The most important project of the quarter had slipped right through her hands. During the emergency meeting, David spoke up, His voice was steady, clear, unwavering. "This was a one-time mistake. If anyone can win this client back, it's Sarah." She looked at him, surprised, but the relief didn't last. One director raised an eyebrow. "Are we sure your personal involvement isn't clouding your judgment, David?" The room went still, and just like that, Sarah felt like she was standing naked in the middle of the room, exposed, stripped of everything she'd tried so hard to protect. Her reputation, her professionalism. But what hurt most was that someone else had to speak for her. "I fought so hard to be heard with my own voice," she whispered to herself later. "And today, I stayed silent." Hours later, long after dark, David appeared at her office door, concern written all over his face. "Sarah, are you okay?" She looked at him with tearful eyes and a hardened expression. "Don't come here out of pity. I don't need you to save me." He exhaled slowly. "I'm not here to save you. I'm here because I care." But she was already too hurt. "You don't know what it's like to fight alone your whole life. You had everything. I only ever had myself." He stepped back, like her words had cut him. David left without another word, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt hollow. She had become everything she swore she wouldn't, bitter, guarded, ruled by fear. That night, in her tiny apartment, she cried herself to sleep, clutching a pillow like it was the last piece of her still intact. The mistake on the project could be fixed, but what had shattered inside her felt far from repair. The next day, Sarah went to work in silence. She ignored the stares, buried herself in reports, avoided contact. Her pride kept her upright, but every step was heavier. She felt like a fraud, someone who preached strength but cracked at the first break. And no matter how hard she tried not to think of David, his absence echoed through her like a missing note in a familiar song. Michael noticed. He had watched the girl from the storm slowly fade into a shadow, and it unsettled him. He didn't know exactly what had happened, but he knew this: some wounds can only heal when faced head-on. So, he waited. He gave her space. Because sometimes to rise again, you have to burn first. That weekend, Sarah opened an old letter from her adoptive mother, one she kept tucked away in the bottom of a box. "Loving takes courage. Running is easy. Fighting for love is for the strong." The words were simple, but they roared like thunder through her soul. And in that moment she realized maybe the mistake wasn't in failing, but in trying to win alone, and something inside her finally started to let go. On Monday morning, Sarah arrived before anyone else. She wore the same blue blouse from her first day on the job, now dry, pressed, and carrying new purpose. She sat at her desk, opened a blank document, and began rewriting the proposal from scratch. Updated data, clear graphs, a contingency plan sharp enough to turn things around. This wasn't just work, it was redemption. She called the client herself, voice calm, steady. She owned the mistake, explained the changes, asked for a second chance. The silence on the other end felt endless. Then finally, "Let's schedule a new meeting. I'm impressed by your honesty." She hung up with trembling hands. For the first time she understood. Strength wasn't pretending nothing hurt. It was owning the pain and moving anyway. By the end of the day, she stood before the executive board and presented the revised plan. Every word was grounded, every slide a reflection of the woman who refused to stay down. The executive's expressions shifted. Even the skeptics nodded. When Michael finally spoke, his voice carried pride he barely tried to hide. "This is the kind of leadership we look for. Thank you, Sarah." She simply smiled, not out of pride, but relief. But even with the professional victory, the silence between her and David remained. They passed each other in the halls, exchanged polite greetings. But the warmth was gone, and it hurt more than she wanted to admit. She missed the lightness, the coffees on her desk, the quiet conversations that didn't require effort. She missed being seen, not as an employee, but as a whole person. That night, Sarah pulled out the old box of memories she kept tucked away. Inside, she found a childhood photo with a message on the back. You have a heart that never stops loving, even when the world doesn't love you back. She read it aloud, and something inside her softened. Maybe it was time to stop running. From herself, from her feelings, from love. Meanwhile, David sat in his father's office, head low. She pushed me away like I was the enemy, he said quietly. Michael listened, then spoke softly. She didn't reject you, son. She rejected the fear of losing everything she's worked for, but she's already proven she can rise again. Maybe now. It's your turn to take the first step. David nodded, but said nothing. Something was stirring inside him too. The next day, Sarah walked into the creative room and stopped. On her desk was an umbrella, the same one she had given away in the rain, months ago. A note sat beside it. Sometimes, one simple gesture changes everything. She smiled, eyes misty. It wasn't about the umbrella. It was about remembering who she was, a woman who chose kindness, even at her own risk. And that didn't need to change. Later that day, she spotted David standing outside the building, watching the rain. This time, she didn't look away. She walked toward him, slow and steady, eyes clear, heart open. David, he turned, surprised. Hey, Sarah, she took a breath. I think I have something to say, and if I don't say it now, I might regret it. Right then, beneath the grey sky, words hovered on the edge of breaking the silence that had hurt them both for too long. But what would she say? And more importantly, was David still ready to listen? Sarah didn't say anything in that moment. The words caught in her throat, choked by fear, but David waited. No rush, no pressure. As if he understood that sometimes the hardest part isn't saying yes. It's admitting you want to. Maybe we could talk another day, she whispered, eyes avoiding his. David nodded, offering a small, quiet smile. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here. And he got into his car, leaving behind a gentler kind of silence. The next day, Michael called Sarah into his office. She walked in tense, expecting another conversation about the project, or worse, the whispers that were starting to circulate through the building. But he greeted her with a soft smile and motioned to the chair across from him. Have a seat. Today, we're not talking about work. Sarah raised her eyebrows, caught off guard. We're not. He turned his computer screen toward her. It was open to a folder of company photos, and in the bottom corner was a photo of her in the reception area on her first day, soaked, determined, holding a shredded resume. Do you remember that? Sarah nodded slowly. Michael turned his chair slightly and gestured toward the corner of the room where, quietly, the umbrella still stood. I kept it, as a reminder, not just of the gesture, but of the woman behind it. Sarah didn't know what to say. Then Michael leaned forward a little, his voice soft, almost a confession. You know what I regret most, Sarah? Waiting too long. I never told my wife she was everything to me. Not until it was too late. He took a deep breath. Sometimes, the biggest risk isn't loving. It's not allowing yourself to. She swallowed hard. It was like those words unlocked a door inside her, one that had been sealed shut since she was 12, when her last foster family let her go with nothing but a wave. Since then, she'd tied love to abandonment. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if, for once, she could surrender without the fear of being left behind? David's hurting, Michael continued, but he's never once crossed your boundaries. He's respected you every step of the way. And that, Sarah, that's real love. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She just looked over at the umbrella, almost a relic now, and remembered who she was that day. A drenched woman, standing tall, acting with her heart, even without a safety net. You've already proven your worth professionally, Michael said gently. Maybe now it's time to prove to yourself that you deserve to be happy too. Sarah nodded in silence, tears falling slowly. For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone was giving her permission to live, to feel, to stumble, and still be loved. Outside the building, David was waiting again. Same place, same rain, but this time she didn't hesitate. She walked toward him with steady steps, stopped just inches away. They were both soaked, but none of it seemed to matter. "I want to try," she said in a near whisper. "I want to learn, with you, about softness, about trust, about staying." David smiled, gently brushing her cheek. "We'll learn together." And for the first time, they stood beneath the same storm. But it didn't feel like an end. It felt like a beginning. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Horizon with a light heart, but cautious steps. She and David had messaged all night, nothing dramatic, just real, honest. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe beside someone else. In the elevator, her reflection looked softer, like her heart had finally found a place to land. But what she didn't expect was the whisper from the next room. "Did you hear? She's with the CEO's son." The words hit like a stone. In the hallway, the glances felt different, longer, sharper, curious. Sarah pretended not to notice, but every step echoed a little louder. A team member avoided eye contact. An intern mumbled something that ended in muffled laughter. For the first time in forever, Sarah felt ashamed to smile, as if the love she had kept so carefully protected had been shoved under a spotlight for judgment. David, upon hearing the rumors, tried to brush it off. "People talk, Sarah. They talk about everything. It'll blow over." But she wasn't so sure. "They think I got this job because of you." The words hurt her more than they hurt him, and that scared her. "Everything I've built here could fall apart because of the one thing that finally makes me feel good." David paused. "Are you saying our love is a threat to your reputation?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah didn't want that to be true, but it was. Not because she doubted their feelings, but because she knew how the corporate world worked. Women like her, with no name, no backing, always had to prove themselves twice as hard. Now she felt like she was being reduced to a relationship headline. "It's not fair," she whispered, "but it's real." Michael sensed the tension and called them both in for a conversation. Inside the closed office, the light felt harsher, the air heavier. Sarah braced for the worst, a warning, a suspension, anything. But what came was unexpected. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," Michael said, "but transparency is the only way to protect your integrity. Tell your story. Don't let others tell it for you." So, later that afternoon, Sarah and David met with the board. They told the truth, calmly, respectfully, sincerely. They shared how it began, how they chose to keep it separate, how carefully they kept emotions from influencing work. The room was tense. Some faces were closed, others open. When they finished, silence. Then a board member finally spoke. "If you lead the way you love with honesty, then you have nothing to fear." In the days that followed, the rumors faded, but the discomfort lingered. Sarah felt vulnerable, like she'd removed her armor in front of an unpredictable crowd. She even considered transferring to another department, but David stopped her. "We don't have to run. We have to stand." And for the first time, she believed that. To rebuild from the inside out, Sarah took the lead on Horizon's most important project. Now, side by side with David. Together, they turned the company's branding campaign into a manifesto about courage, authenticity, and human innovation. It was more than work. It was a reflection of who they were becoming. And the team started to respect them for it. But even as everything began to align, one question still haunted Sarah. What if all of this ends one day? The title, the company, the structure. What would be left? One night she turned to David and asked, "If everything falls apart, would you still be here?" He took her hand, steady and warm. "It's not about what we have, Sarah. It's about who we are when it's all gone." Spring arrived like a promise of rebirth. The air felt lighter at horizon. Sarah walked through the halls with a new light in her eyes. Not arrogance, but the quiet glow of someone who had weathered the storm and survived. Her colleagues no longer looked at her with doubt, but with genuine respect. She didn't need to be protected. She just needed space to show her strength. David, in turn, discovered a new kind of leadership by her side, softer, more attentive. With Sarah, he learned to listen without rushing, to challenge with empathy. Together, they built a more human culture inside the company. And when they unveiled the Roots of Innovation project, an initiative that combined social impact with technology, the room erupted in applause. They weren't just a couple anymore. They were an unstoppable team. Michael watched them with quiet pride. Horizon was growing, yes, but more than that, it was evolving. And much of that change had Sarah's fingerprints. Her story had become legend. The Umbrella Woman, some called her. And the old umbrella, still in Michael's office, framed with a small plaque underneath, "Leadership begins with compassion." But within Sarah, a quieter transformation was unfolding. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. For the first time, she felt like she belonged. Her childhood, marked by closed doors, had given way to rooms that now opened with her name on the plaque. The voices in her head that once shouted, "You're not enough," now whispered, "You made it." Because you deserved it. David sought her advice. Team members came to her with difficult decisions. Even board members consulted her in strategic meetings. Sarah, the girl from foster care, had become the woman who created belonging for others. Not because she chased power, but because she turned any space into home, any team into family. And at home, love bloomed simply, cooking together, reading side by side, laughing at inside jokes. David didn't want to rescue Sarah. He wanted to walk beside her. And that made all the difference. "You're my choice." Every day, he'd say. And Sarah, once afraid of love, now embraced the privilege of being loved, without ever having to shrink. In time, the board began discussing leadership transition. Michael was ready to retire, and he saw in Sarah and David the perfect successors. The offer came by email. Sarah read the message with trembling hands. Her, co-CEO? It felt like something out of a movie, but it was real. She was no longer the girl who survived the rain. She was the one now commanding the sky. She said yes, with tears in her eyes and her head held high. Not out of vanity, but for every Sarah still fighting in silence out there. "I want to be an example, not an exception," she wrote in her reply. And Michael on the other end smiled with misty eyes. The daughter he never had by blood, but whom life gave him as a legacy. That afternoon, while reviewing a report, Sarah looked out the window. It had started to rain, a soft, gentle rain. She stood, walked to the company balcony, and stretched out her hand to feel the drops. Behind her, David appeared silently, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Still like the rain?" he asked. She smiled. "It brought me here." But little did she know, the biggest surprise was yet to come. That night, Horizon held its annual gala. The auditorium glowed in navy and gold, filled with employees, investors, and partners. On the stage, a screen played memories from throughout the company's journey, and among them, quietly, an image of Sarah in the lobby, soaked, with the caption, "Every journey begins with courage." She watched in silence, heart beating between past and present. Michael stepped onto the stage and in a steady voice announced his retirement. "Tonight I close a chapter. and pass this company to the two most devoted people I've ever known." All eyes turned to Sarah and David. A hush fell over the room. Michael smiled. "As of today, they are the new co-CEOs of Horizon Innovations." The crowd erupted into applause. Sarah covered her mouth, her eyes brimming. She never imagined that one umbrella would carry her this far. She stepped onto the stage, asked for the microphone, and took a deep breath. "I didn't know that small act in the rain would change everything, but it did, and not because of luck, but because someone believed that compassion is the highest form of leadership." She looked at Michael, then at David, and continued, "If I got here, it's because kindness opened doors no resume ever could, and I hope to open many more from here on out." The crowd rose to their feet, moved. But for Sarah, the most important moment was still ahead. After the ceremony, David took her by the hand and led her outside the building. It was drizzling, soft, steady, like the sky was gently rinsing the world clean. They stopped on the sidewalk, lit by the building's golden lights. And there, beneath the same kind of rain from a year ago, he knelt down. He pulled a simple ring from his pocket and said, voice thick with emotion, "I don't just want to share a company with you. I want to share life. The good days, the hard ones. The rain and the coffee. Sarah Thompson, will you marry me?" She laughed through tears, stunned and completely present. "You're not afraid of mixing business with personal life, David?" He smiled. "Not anymore, because you taught me that when there's respect, love only adds." She said yes. Amid laughter, tears, and soft rain they kissed, not as executives, not as colleagues, but as two souls who by fate or chance had found each other beneath the same umbrella. Somewhere in the building, Michael watched from the window, eyes full. "Now," he whispered, "Horizon finally has a heart." Months later, Sarah launched a national campaign called The Umbrella Effect, an initiative to hire youth from underserved communities. The symbol, a single umbrella, with the words, "To lead is to protect." She had become more than a CEO. She was now a symbol of a new kind of success, human, empathetic, and transformational. And even today, when the rain begins to fall in San Francisco, some say they've seen a red-haired woman crossing the street with a smile on her face and an umbrella in her hand. Maybe it's Sarah, or maybe it's just someone inspired by her. Because kindness once planted never dies. It grows. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. Turn on notifications, because in the next video, you'll meet someone who had to choose between forgiveness or disappearing forever.